My name's Tim Walter and I'm a geomancer, that's a house healer, and a life coach. I used to be a filmmaker, and in 2003, in the year that I first met my mentor Hamish Miller, I made a documentary with him called The Spirit of the Serpent. Now, The Spirit of the Serpent is a half-an-hour programme that we pitched to broadcasters about earth energy at sacred sites. So what I want to do now is to show you the first half of The Spirit of the Serpent, and in it you'll see Hamish Miller dousing the earth energies at the Merry Maidens stone circle in Cornwall, and other people, his friends and his colleagues, investigating the space to find out what they can find there. Some on a more spiritual aspect, like Julie Soskin, and some on a more scientific aspect, like Jim Lyons. The programme is presented by Claire Grogan, and she does a wonderful job. But I have to say that I think sometimes she wondered what she got herself into, like a lot of people do when they first come across earth energy. So here it is, The Spirit of the Serpent from 2003.
Hello and welcome to another 2-day serpenteering. This week we're at the Merry Maidens, which are just outside of Penzance in Cornwall, England. We're here to find out more about these fantastic stones and just why on earth they were put here thousands of years ago.
What effect can entering a sacred site have on the human body? Is the peaceful atmosphere more than just our imagination? And will we find any of the mysterious symbolic shapes often created by earth energy?
By using a combination of metaphysics and traditional science, we'll try to understand the flow of energy that surrounds the site, as well as learn more about what our ancestors knew when they built the circle.
All our regular teams here, Hamish and Ba, are mapping out the energy flow with those lethal-looking but trusty dowsing rods of theirs. Rupert's been finding out more about the local folklore. Julie, our sensitive, is quietly communing with the stones, of course.
And here's Jim, our rock of scientific sanity, in amongst all this metaphysics madness. So Jim, what have you got planned for us this week?
Well, we have 2 or 3 experiments for us this week, and the first one is a very simple one, which is aimed at measuring the energy coming from the stone circle. We have a second one, which is measuring the effect of the energy from the circle on you, or me. And the third one is really a slightly cleverer one, which really measures how people are learning to dowse. We can measure the brainwave reaction as a result of dowsing.
Well, just what this circle of stone will reveal to us over the next 2 days is anyone's guess. When the team arrived here, the first thing they did was to gently familiarise themselves with the circle.
And I always feel I have to ask, because it's like going in a cathedral.
No, you can't turn your back on it once you're in.
It's very comfortable there, but I find it uncomfortable here.
I think there are patches where you feel quite disorientated.
The discomfort is perfectly logical, because there's so much,
Yes, there is.
so many different
Yes,
frequencies of
there
energy
is.
around. You're bound to hit one that gets you in the gut.
It's also very powerful, so when you get powerful energy it can feel quite disorientating anyway.
Yeah, it seems to be getting excited about what we're doing.
Yeah, I felt that too as we came in. It's like, oh goody.
Later, I was keen to find out what the team wanted to achieve here.
Now you guys have had the chance to get to know the site a bit. I've watched you all pacing around, touching stones, doing weird things with washing lines, or what it looks like to me. I mean, what's everyone's expectations?
And this one in particular, I'm looking for the energy centre in the circle, which will not be in the centre. It'll be offset, and I hope to find from that there's radials of energy coming out of the stones. These subtle energies are all different in all different sites, and they're bands of different energies. They have a different effect on our way of thinking and our behaviour, and that's why we have to find out a lot more about it.
And what's it going to tell us though about the people that erected these stones?
Hopefully we're going to try and get into their mindset, but that's the difficult thing, because it's 4,000 years old, but it may have started long before that as a sacred site. It may have gradually built when they started realising just how important this place was. And as they worked with it, the odd thing is that the earth energy seems to respond to consciousness.
Now, Jim, are you agreeing with any of this?
Pretty much so, really. I follow on, in a way, from where Hamish leads off, because I'm interested in taking this idea of all these energy fields, we call them subtle energy fields, and seeing how all this stuff relates to mainstream science. I really sort of come with a scientific viewpoint, but I've got this gut feeling that somehow it's very strongly linked to all this ancient stuff.
Rupert, I read somewhere in the research notes it's got something to do with women being punished for having a good time. Something along those lines.
The original story was that these were the maidens who were turned to stone for daring to dance on a Sabbath. That's a common myth across the country.
Now, Julie, I've seen you touching them, practically hugging them. It's got a very touchy-feely thing going on.
I'm trying to attune to them to see if they can speak to me, as it were. Not literally like you and me, but give me a sense. I work with subtle energies, so I get a sense of what might have been there. And the overriding feeling for me is one of love, actually. There's a lot of care that has gone into these stones. I think all down the ages, it's a very happy place.
You know, you can't help but feel there's definitely something going on, but I'm still not convinced that it's not just a nice picnic spot, Hamish. But I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Next, Hamish set about dowsing to find the power centre and the major earth energy lines that enter and leave the circle.
Where they cross will be the energy centre of the whole circle. So can you stick that in?
Yep.
We'll keep that as a permanent marker, so I'll have to use the earth energy is weaves like a river. It's such a complex thing. They join in with the next ones coming in, like big arteries coming together into the mainstream around the world, and then out to the cosmos. That's coming right through that gap. This is a controversial one, because I think there should be a stone there, actually. But then people argue that it should only be 19 because it's related to the moon. I don't know. But anyway, that energy line, they may have allowed for that, this line coming in. That's a possibility.
Hamish had his own idea about the gap in the circle, but we'd find out later that some of the team had different ideas.
Each of these lines has a number of lines within it. And they will be going in different directions, probably feeding in and coming out, so we'll just check. And actually, all you have to do is ask. And that one is feeding that way. And the next one is that way. They are different frequencies, they are male, female, positive, negative, or yin-yang, or whatever. But there are differences in these lines, and they're feeding different energy in. And it's going through that stone, and that stone will react to this energy, but it's not dependent on it because it has its own energy centre and its own function, and it's related to the centre. Every power centre has a vortex around it, and straight radials coming out like spokes of a bicycle wheel. And they will tie up from here, from this power centre, to each individual stone. I think that's what the ancients were marking, because they didn't necessarily start with 20. They may have started with half a dozen stones, just marking the odd radial coming out. But as it develops in ceremony, the whole system seems to develop, and the earth responds to what people are doing in the ceremony. This is the controversial one where I think there's a stone missing. And they're never evenly spaced because they're very often bunched where there's an energy line feeding in. I think the radials were here originally coming from the energy centre, because there are hundreds of cases of power centres which are not marked by stones, which have radials. And I think the function of this thing is, by the old people, is to mark where these radials are, because it's part of their sacred temple, if you like. The hugely important part of it is to make a permanent record of the basic number of radials coming out of this centre. So the full treatment would have 20 radials coming out, 20 going through the space. There's no other way to find these except by dowsing. Japanese are developing some equipment that hopefully will do the job that I'm doing and more accurately. On the other hand, I think if I put a little meter on the top with numbers on it, people would believe this thing. Number 3.
The lines of earth energy Hamish was finding fitted perfectly with what Jim, our academic, was expecting.
But all the numbers that you find associated with all these alignments of stones are related to the good old platonic solids of Greek geometry. You can find out all sorts of angles from that, and you find all those angles, believe it or not, in stone circles. And an absolute classic example of this in terms of earth energies is volcanoes. Volcanoes are distributed according to very specific rules. And a wonderful example is Easter Island. And there are 3 dormant volcanoes on Easter Island, and they form a beautiful angle, with an angle of, believe it or not, 109.471 degrees. That can be as specific as that, and it barely does align with that. It all comes from the simplest of the platonic solids, the tetrahedron. And that's the angle that you find just about everywhere in earth energies. These lines gradually get closer together the nearer you go to the centre of the circle. And in fact, this whole thing follows a very precise mathematical rule called the geometric series, and we find this absolutely everywhere in earth energies. Well, the distance from the centre of these stones to this edge line here is about 33.5 inches, or around about 2.72 feet. And when Alexander Thom, an engineer who was a Cambridge professor, he analysed something like 900 stone circles throughout the UK, and this figure of 2.72 feet kept coming up time and time and time again. And he called it the megalithic yard because it's as near as damn to a yard. And it's stayed with us ever since. And the academic world really doesn't believe in this number. But in fact, what I've done recently is analysed the geophysics of the Earth in terms of magnetic field and gravitational field. And when you start to look at the balance between the energies, a characteristic length comes out of these equations. And that length is precisely 2.72 feet.
All these stone circles seem to have 8 concentric circles of energy around the stones. They start, Jim says it's a megalithic yard just outside, and then they gradually come in. And I thought there was a sort of protection thing, but it's not really. I think it's almost a sensor. And when you come in, you cross this in the right frame of mind to accept what's happening inside, the whole thing switches on to the consciousness it's working with.
One of the things about stone circles is there's always an anomaly in the magnetic field. Generally speaking, the magnetic field inside a stone circle is slightly less, by about 1 or 2% compared with that outside. And also the other thing is the magnetic field is variable, and you can find this very easily with a simple map compass. But generally this particular stone circle is pretty smooth. But in fact there's a small area just over here which is in fact anomalous. And I've got this aligned to north. But as I moved into this sort of region, round about these 2 stones here, relatively small region, it smoothly swings by about 30 degrees. So there's a 30-degree anomaly in the position of north.
Well, that was much earlier today. Hamish, there looks like there's an awful lot going on here.
There surely is. There's been a lot doing, but this we've just managed to do the sort of bare necessities of showing what's been happening in this energy centre.
Now, I've seen you do this a few times. How on earth can I believe that it's all for real?
It's difficult to say. I can't actually prove this is happening. There's no other way of finding this, and it's such a subtle energy. There's no way of finding it without a dowsing rod. What we're finding is absolutely astonishing. You can see what happens, and all these radials, straight radials coming out through the stones. We've got spirals.
And it's all meeting in the centre.
It's all meeting in the centre. It's all happening in the centre. That's the simplest thing in the centre. We've got experiments to do in the centre which are mind-blowing.
You've got a lot more to do, clearly. I better leave you to it then.
Thank you very much.
We'll leave Hamish to finish off here while he's still got some light, and we'll find out later on in the show what else he discovers. Coming up, Julie, our sensitive, will tell us what she's been picking up on, and we're going to learn a little more about the folklore and legend from Rupert.
Yeah, it's fine.
Right.
I think we'll call it a day.
I think so, yep, a day.
Oh.